Mindset is the key, or a key. How do you shift your mindset? I was going to ask a question that's related to that, and that is, you're now, well, you say you're top of the world, but you're a confident guy. What do you do? What do you do when you have self-doubt? And that's sort of, how do you shift your mindset? How do you deal with self-doubt?
Self-doubt is, instead of self-doubt, I would say questioning. I think it's critical to question, but at certain stages. If you're questioning all the time, you have nothing but fear and doubt, right? You only believe something because you don't question it. So for me, I think there's a time to question. And so I organize that. When I'm beginning something, I do that. And my investments is a perfect example. If you look at somebody, like Richard Branson, for example. Richard is this giant risk taker, right? But he questions. He's got one question. He questions within himself and everyone else. How are we going to protect the downside? It's his number one question. He never believed it. The guy risks his life. When it comes to investments in business, he doesn't risk anything. He told me when he was building Virgin, he's taking on British Airways, and it's a giant outlay of capital. I mean, this could literally bankrupt him, and everybody said it would. So he said, okay, how to protect the downside? And he negotiated with Boeing for a year and a half and convinced them that if he went out of business, if he was wrong and lost his business in the first 2 years, he could get back all the jets and have no liability whatsoever. So his whole focus is asymmetrical risk reward. How do I take the least risk with the most upside? If I was going to say anything to entrepreneurs in this room, the illusion that you've been taught is that great entrepreneurs take giant risks. It's total bullshit. There are some exceptions that have, and they've gotten lucky. But if you look at the ones that consistently succeed, they know the upside will take care of itself. They focus on how to protect the downside, and they take risk where they know I'm taking a limited risk for an unlimited upside. So if I'm wrong, I'm still okay. I work with Paul Tudor Jones, one of the top 10 traders in the history of the world. And Paul, I've worked with him, I've coached him now for 24 years. He hasn't lost money in those 24 years on his own personal trading. And during that time, I've learned so much from him. And the biggest thing I learned from him was this asymmetrical risk reward, that when he risks $1, he wants to be certain he's going to make $5 where he doesn't risk the dollar. See, most people risk $1 to make 10% or 20%. You won't do that. If you do that, you're going to go broke. Because here's what happens. You risk $1 to try to make $5 and you're wrong. Risk another $1, and if you win, you still win big. You can be wrong 4 out of 5 times and still break even. That's how the best in the world do it. They don't do it by taking these gigantic risks where everything's on the line, and if it doesn't go perfectly, you're out of business. That's why most businesses go out. You want to think of asymmetrical risk reward.
Tudor Jones, curiously, as an aside, was a classmate of mine at the University of Virginia.
Wow, that's awesome.
I met him there. He would never remember me, but a fascinating guy. Another aside, because you mentioned he's a hedge fund manager in Connecticut. You did a brilliant interview with Ray Dalio for, I believe it was Facebook, not long ago. Yeah. And his book is really terrific, called Principles.
I recommend you all go get it.
Very, very good.
It's one of the greatest business books I've ever read, because you don't know who Ray is. Most of you know Warren Buffett. That's because Warren Buffett is sweet in shares and is public nature. But Ray is actually the most successful investor of his type in the history of the world. He's returned more money to investors from a hedge fund perspective than anybody in history. When I met Ray 10 years ago, you had to have a $5 billion net worth for him to talk to you. You couldn't be a billionaire, that's too weak. And you had to give him $100 million to start. Now he won't take your money no matter who you are. When I went to go interview him the first time, the Prime Minister of China was talking to him on the phone. He was coaching China on what to do with their money. That's how brilliant he is. Yeah. Hedge fund people, if you're familiar with rich people give their money hedge funds, a big one might be, let's say, 20 billion. He's 160 billion. But go get his book. He flew down to Palm Beach to my home. And it's called Principles. He said, I want you to be the first person to interview me and do it on Facebook Live, so I did. But I love this man, and he will show you how he built from nothing. He literally started with nothing. He worked as a caddy. He started when he was 26 years old in a 2-bedroom apartment, and now he's got 1,800 employees and 160 billion. And he's one of the 100 richest men in the world and one of the top 10 that you'll meet. But his insights about how to run a business, how to run your life, we all need principles to guide our decision making. If you really think about it, success is the result of good judgment, right? If you make great decisions, you're going to succeed. But where does good judgment come from? Good judgment often comes from experience, and experience often comes from bad judgment, right? So what I found is the way to speed it up, the way to have less of that bad judgment is
I got to think about that for a minute. That's good. That's
true, though, right?
Good, yeah.
So I found the way to speed it up is not learn through my own experience, but learn by modeling others, compress decades into days. So if you can get in a Ray's head, now Ray's been a very private man for the last decade and a half, but he's 68 years old. He's a good friend, and he's entering this stage where he now wants to go public for a short time, give everybody a nose, and then disappear because he feels an obligation to give back to the society and human beings that have helped him to succeed.
Yeah,
so go pick it up. It'll be fantastic.
We had him at another event, and he talks about this idea of radical transparency and
Yes.
how he runs his business. It's a very different. I'm not sure it would work for every business, but it certainly worked for him. Let's go to Satori's question. With so many people wanting your help, what are the factors for you to select whom you privately train or mentor? You're a busy guy. You've got a time management thing. I'm sure a lot of people would like a piece of Tony Robbins' mind.
Yes.
How do you decide whom you're going to help?
Well, first of all, I try to do things online. There's a zillion things on YouTube, so no one has to spend any money. Anybody who wants to be inspired to do that. The only thing I don't like about that is it's random. I'm a system guy. Like, I know how to take you from here to there. So I have products that can do that for people. And then I have events, and the events have gotten bigger and bigger. Now we do 10, 14,000 people in a weekend. And so anybody can go.
Little anecdote I read, since you brought up Mark Benioff, that I guess he was a guest at your home or resort in Fiji, and in the middle of the night, he and all of the other guests, this goes to the question of how do you overcome your fears. Tell that story about Benioff jumping into the river and what you didn't tell him about the river.
Well, I have a home in Fiji. I've been going there since I was 23, 24 years old. It's one of my favorite places in the world, and the people there are extraordinary. You're carried as a child every day for 6 months by someone 24/7. So when I talk about raising them, being raised by a village, it's true there. And they sing in 4-part harmony when they're 4 years old. So when I went there, I was touched by it. And I went and explored this island, and I was with this chief. And they have this river that goes both ways, because it's this river where the ocean comes in, and it looks like out of Africa or something you'd see down in South America, and eventually goes in this scary looking area into a giant lake. But the tide is so fast, it would just take you. And then 8 hours later, it reverses and goes back out. So I was with him this one day, and I said, "Are there any, fish in there?" And the Ratu, which is the main chief, points out, goes, "What about that?" And we looked back, and it's a giant manta ray going under the bridge. So I said, "F it, I'm doing this." And I just jumped in, and then the thing took me, and it took me for a wild-ass ride. For about 20 minutes, I ended up this lake, and then, dumbass me, I didn't think about how the hell am I going to get back. It was so strong I couldn't swim against it, so I spent 8 hours on this little island there before I came back. So then I came back one time with a friend. It was nighttime, and I was like, they were talking about Devil Rock and Shark Alley and all this shit. And I was like, let's do it at night. But I had a boat waiting for us in the lake to bring us back. But we jumped in, and it was scary as hell, and all the phosphorescence going on looks like pixie dust. It's a wild. Experience. Flying fish scare the shit out of you. They come by. And so when Mark came, he flew over and come spend a week with me there. I took him and woke him up, and you have to do when the tide is. It was like 2 a.m. I woke them all up and said, "I got a surprise for you." I'm like, "What?" I said, "Just trust me." Dragged them all on, put wet gear on them, gave them life preservers, and then threw them off. And Mark was freaking out, and I grabbed his hand. I go, "We go on 3, 1," and we went on 1. Whatever you're afraid of, it's never as much as you're afraid of, right? It's how many things you've been afraid of that never happen. Right? And then the things you are afraid of, if they do happen, you just deal with them. It's that old phrase, coward dies 1,000 deaths, a courageous man only once. I discipline myself, not perfectly, but for the most part, I don't worry about shit till it happens. I anticipate it, but I don't worry about it.
How do you stay in a great state of mind 24/7? Should that even be your goal?
I think it's worthwhile to have as a goal. I don't think it's realistic 24/7 whatever having any dwarfs, because we all have a 2 million-year-old brain. Everybody in this room has that. I do too. And it's not designed to make you happy. It's designed to make you survive. So if I said to all of you right now, what does that brain look for? It looks for what can hurt you, and it exaggerates it. And since there's no saber-toothed tiger now, it says, what are people thinking of me? Will my business make it? Do I have enough money? And these are all easy things to solve, but our reactions in our gut, when we let the fear part of our mind take over, that basically the survival software. If it runs you, you're in trouble. So a few years ago, I actually lecture on this now. I say, you need 2 skills to have the quality of life you want. If you want an extraordinary life on your terms, whatever your terms are, you need to master the skill of the science of achievement. You got to figure out, how do I take what I dream about and make it real? And it's a science. And you can model other people and you can learn, you can speed up. I've spent my lifetime doing that. But the second skill, and the one that most people don't give enough value to culturally, is more important. And that is, you need to alter, if you want an extraordinary life, how many people do you know that have achieved it? How many have done this? Who's achieved a goal that was a big goal? You worked your ass off and you achieved it. And then your brain went, is this all there is? Who's had one of these moments? Yeah, almost everybody. And that's worse than failing, because we're all achievers in this room, right? So if you fail, what are you going to do? You get back up, you try another approach, you're going to eventually succeed. You know it in your gut if you're really driven. But if you succeed and you're miserable, now you're what I call technically screwed. You're not happy with what you got. I mean, failing, you get up. Do something new, but succeeding, where do you go? So I really believe, you look at somebody like say Robin Williams. I think the loss of him was one of the greatest losses we had. He's loved worldwide. I asked people all over the world last year, in China, I asked them in Japan and Sydney, Australia, throughout the US, how many of you loved, don't raise your hand if you liked him, how many of you loved Robin Williams? I'm curious. Keep your hands up, look around the room. Like 98%, only 2% assholes that didn't like Robin. When I said this, I didn't say like, I said loved. And so here's a guy, was he an overachiever? He came to Hollywood, everybody comes to Hollywood. He said, I'm on my own show. Oh yeah, sure you are, buddy. I was old enough to remember the show. What was it called?
Mork and Mindy.
Mork and Mindy. It's old people in this room, clearly, right? He does Mork and Mindy, but he also makes it the #1 show. Then he says, I'm gonna have a beautiful family. He does that. Then he says, I'm gonna make more money than I can spend. He does that. Then he says, I wanna make movies. He does that. Then he says, I want to win an Academy Award for not being funny. His #1 skill. And he did it. And then he hung himself in his own home, leaving his wife and children to find his lifeless body. How do you explain that?